Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're getting to a really critical period of history. We're doing a deep dive into the late Ottoman Empire, looking at that, well, turbulent 50 years between 1876 and 1926. This era basically set the stage for the modern Middle East as we know it.
Yeah, and when people typically look at this time, the story often goes something like this. It's a simple, inevitable move towards modernity, away from traditional religion, towards secular, Western-style nations. But the sources we're looking at today, they really challenge that whole narrative. It's just not that simple.
Exactly. So our mission here is to explore the scholarship, showing that religion and nationalism, they weren't really separate camps fighting each other, not at all. Instead, modern nationalist ideas, especially in the Middle East, got deeply, sometimes, explosively tangled up with religious faith, specifically Islam. We're going to find their modern political selves by using, not ditching, religious language.
It's a fascinating paradox, isn't it? You've got the Ottoman center, mostly Turkish elites, and then the groups on the edges, like Arabs and Kurds. And they're all doing this modern thing, defining us versus them, but they're doing it by blending these new political demands with really traditional religious authority, not separating them.
Okay, so let's unpack that theoretical bit straight away because it's sort of key to everything else. We often lean on those classic Western ideas about nationalism, thinkers like Gellner maybe, who basically said nationalism is modern, so it must be secular. If religion shows up, it's just like leftover culture, not real religion anymore.
Right, and that assumption, that's where a lot of the confusion comes from when you study this period. Because what if religious identity isn't just culture? What if it's deeply embedded, part of what some scholars call the embodied habits of social life, the everyday things, often subconscious, that tell you who belongs and who doesn't? Ah, I see. So if your religious practices or your community's traditions or even how you interpret your faith, if those are the main things setting us apart from them, then that religious difference naturally becomes, well, the core feature of your new national identity.
Absolutely. And this points to something really critical about nationalism itself. It often works by effectively making the secular sacred. It lifts the idea of the nation up to this level of like moral importance, almost holy, uniting this single pure community. It sounds a lot like Durkheim's ideas about religion, doesn't it? The nation demands a kind of devotion.
That really does reframe things. And for you listening, getting this fusion is, well, it's vital for understanding so many modern political movements in the region. Think about contemporary Islamism, for example. These movements might talk universalism, but they operate totally within the modern nation-state system. The political fight becomes the sacred fight.
Exactly that framework. And it's what we see emerging right from the Turkish center of the Ottoman Empire. Right, let's start there then. With the Ottomans, the dominant power. It's a stark paradox, isn't it? Under Sultan Abdulhamid II, the state is officially pushing pan-Islamism, unity of all Muslims under the caliph.
But the sources really show this wasn't just about pure religious feeling. This pan-Islamism, it was a political strategy. It was basically Turkish nationalism in religious clothing, a defense mechanism against the West, sure, but also, crucially, a reaction to the rise of other nationalisms bubbling up among their own subjects, Christian and Muslim alike. It was about survival, about holding the empire together.
And to make that work, this pan-Islamism, the Ottoman intellectuals had to pull off this, well, pretty stunning maneuver. They had to try and decouple the Islamic world, which they politically dominated, from its traditional heart language, Arabic.
Yeah, this is where you find some genuinely radical thinking. People like Ahmad Midhat arguing that Turks actually had a greater Islamic zeal than Arabs, flipping the whole historical script.
But the really clever part, politically speaking, and maybe shocking theologically, was his move on language. Midhat argued the Quran wasn't actually an Arabic text. He called it Allah's, the language of God.
Just pause and think about what that does. By saying the Quran's language is divine, separate from earthly Arabic, he basically strips Arabic of its unique spiritual status. Then he could just dismiss Arabic as, I think he called it, a backwards Semitic language, cutting that deep link between Turkish political power and Arab cultural dominance in Islam.
That is radical. If the Quran isn't intrinsically Arabic, you completely undermine the prestige of the Arab world.
Wow.
And others, like Shams ad-Din Sami, they push this even harder.
Oh, yeah. Sami basically claimed Arab contributions to modern Islam were, well, negative. He mocked people who defended Arabic's importance. For him, The real Ottoman language, which was Turkish, was superior, totally distinct from Semitic Arabic. Language was the main battlefield. It was seen as the literal basis of the nation.
And this wasn't just talk, right? This became actual state policy. What do the sources show about how they enforced this Turkification?
It was systematic, really. We've got documents from way back in 1856 showing the state sending teachers to Paris, of all places, to teach Turkish to non-Muslim Ottoman citizens living abroad. It was about assimilation, ensuring loyalty. This identity project was global.
Wait, teachers to Paris for Turkish assimilation. That really shows the scale of this effort, defining Turkishness far beyond Istanbul.
Exactly. And inside the empire, the bureaucracy was the tool. We see archival records with new rules. All penal system records had to be in Turkish, even in places where, the suspects, the witnesses, even the local officials only spoke Arabic or Kurdish or Persian.
That's a huge administrative barrier, clearly designed to push Turkish forward.
And aimed right at the kids. In places like Basra, way out on the edge of the empire, new rules meant a teacher could teach Turkish in middle school without even knowing Arabic. The stated goal was to get children used to alıştırılmaları Turkish right from elementary school. It's clear proof. The ruling Turkish group was defining Ottoman through language, even while shouting about universal pan-Islamism.
Okay, so the Turkish center is defining itself using this official Islam. But it's heavily laced with Turkic language and, let's face it, ethnic supremacy. But these efforts to centralize, they just sparked reactions, didn't they? If the Ottoman elite looked down on non-Turks like an internal Orientalism, then the Arab and Kurdish movements fired back with their own claims of ethno-religious purity.
Precisely. That takes us right to the periphery. We have to look at Arab revivalists. People like Muhammad Abduh and Abd al-Rahman al-Kawakibi. They reacted to Turkish claims by making counterclaims about Arab ethnic and religious superiority.
And this is where that purity argument comes in strong. Al-Kawakibi, you mentioned him, he specifically argued that the Arabs of the peninsula had pure and unmixed blood, which, in his view, made them uniquely qualified to lead the Muslim world to hold the caliphate.
That's a direct hit on the Sultan in Istanbul, isn't it? He's basically saying the Turkish caliphs are impure, politically, ethnically impure. He's using pure blood, a classic modern nationalist idea, to lay claim to a traditional religious office, the caliphate. The fusion is right there.
And Muhammad Abduh adds more weight to this counter-story. He saw Turkish power as corrupt. He claimed that non-Arab, meaning Turkish influence, was the main reason for Islamic degeneration. Initat, I think was the term.
Yeah, initat. And Abdullah's argument was very specific, very cutting. He claimed Turks, because they converted late to Islam, remained unable to grasp the spirit of Islam. He even said they'd polluted the purity of the Arabic language itself, which he, totally unlike Mintat, saw as fundamentally linked to Islam's true spirit. So that's the Arab counterclaim. Turks can't be legitimate leaders because you're ethnically and linguistically incapable of understanding the religion you claim to lead.
So the Arab claim centers on language and ancestry. What about the Kurdish case? It shows this fusion too, but maybe in a different way.
Yeah.
More politically direct.
Exactly. The Kurdish example often gets sidelined, but that 1880 revolt, led by the Naqshbandi Sheikh Ubaydullah of Neri, it's a perfect blend of religion and emerging ethno-national feeling.
It was definitely a political play for a separate Kurdish area, but framed entirely in religious difference. That 1880 letter he wrote to a missionary seems key.
It's crystal clear. He declares, the Kurdish nation is a people apart. Their religion is different from that of others, and their laws and customs distinct. See? He's using the language of religion and custom to make a modern claim. We are a distinct nation.
So the you versus them is defined by this mix. And other Kurdish scholars felt the same way, seeing Istanbul's Islam as somehow impure.
Yeah, they viewed the Islam in Istanbul as suspicious, contaminated, and inauthentic. They contrasted it with what they saw as the pure and authentic Islam of the Kurdish mountains.
And Ubaydullah's move was deeply political too. He didn't just doubt the Sultan's spiritual authority.
No, he actively sought help from non-Muslims, the British, other Western powers, to actually break up the caliph's territory. He was using his religious status as a sheikh to make modern, nationalist, diplomatic moves. It's quite strategic.
Which brings us to the final act, really, the abolition of the caliphate itself, the very symbol everyone was fighting over.
And it's important to remember, the khilafah, the caliphate, it wasn't always this single, fixed thing throughout history. Thinkers like Ibn Taymiyyah, centuries earlier, accepted multiple rulers. That kind of flexibility is what allowed the Ottoman sultans to claim the title in the first place, even though they weren't Arabs.
But when the new Kemalist state abolished it in 1924, That was the breaking point. Mustafa Kemal eventually called the caliphate a calamity bosh belasa, something that just served foreign interests, not the new Turkish Republic.
And what's really telling is the justification the new Turkish state used internally. The Turkish Justice Minister, Said Bey, arguing for abolition in 24, he publicly admitted something huge. He said the ulama, the religious scholars in India and Egypt and significantly in Kurdistan, had never actually recognized the Ottoman rulers as legitimate caliphs.
Wow. That admission, right from their own government, it just pulls the rug out from under the whole Ottoman claim of universal legitimacy. It shows just how effective those peripheral claims of purity and authenticity had become, didn't it?
It really did. And for the Kurds, well, the abolition was the final proof. For Sheikh Said and the big Kurdish revolt in 1925, getting rid of the caliphate just confirmed that the Kemalists were pushing a purely Turkish nationalist agenda that was fundamentally anti-religious, in their eyes.
So the revolt's goal was clearly modern, to liberate Kurdistan and the Kurdish nation, but dressed in religious terms. They wanted a traditional Muslim state based on Islamic law, but within specific ethnic borders.
And the ultimate irony, it comes from the Turkish state's own report on that revolt. The official report basically dismissed the religious talk. It called the uprising a fully fledged nationalist milli movement in religious garb.
That sums up this whole deep dive perfectly, doesn't it? The state knew it was nationalism they were facing, but that nationalism was speaking the language of Islam. They saw the religious covering, but understood the political body beneath. So what's the takeaway here for you listening to this history? We started by questioning that simple story of religious fading away, replaced by secularism. What we've seen is something much more complex, a real entanglement, ethnic and national goals expressed through religious language, not instead of it.
Yeah, the Turkishness hidden inside pan-Islamism, the Arabness claimed through ideas of purity, the Kurdishness defined by a kind of regional Islamic authenticity. These were all competing nationalisms. Each group used its own take on Islam as the key martyr, the U.S. versus them, to demand modern political self-determination.
These weren't just religious fights that got messy with politics. They were ethno-religious claims to statehood. Piety and power, completely intertwined tools in the struggle for modern sovereignty.
So if we accept that national identity often hinges on those subtle, sometimes unconscious reminders of difference, language, custom, maybe faith, and if nationalism is the modern global rulebook that says communities have a right to govern themselves, then here's something to think about. Is it possible that in a world completely structured by nation states, like ours is, any group fighting for its identity, even if its main goal seems secular, does it inevitably have to adopt a language of moral, maybe even sacred, difference to truly assert its right to exist against others? It's certainly something to keep in mind when you look at conflicts over borders and legitimacy around the world today.